Shalom Aleichem to everybody. And again, we want to thank Rabbi Yisrael Yudkowsky, our wonderful Talmud, who has been so helpful in disseminating the shiurim to the public. And we hope that the Olam is getting hana. We did hear that the last Gedolim series, which was about Reb Chaim, famous story that we spoke about, had a little bit of a viral effect, and I even mentioned before that my own dear mother, Shabika Stark, who doesn't own a computer, she was called by a friend who saw it, and then my mother was able to see it as well. So it was kedai. It's kedai, all of it, just for the keep it aim, that we were able to get my mother to see one of the podcasts coming out. So I felt very much that, even though I've spoken about Reb Chaim, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh V'Vracha, the entire world has been speaking about Reb Chaim, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh V'Vracha. We're all impacted by the loss. And on one hand, we're impacted by the loss. On the other hand, we're kind of like enraptured by the amount of stories that are coming out. And everyone has a Reb Chaim story. It's like really amazing. And the truth is, when we were today, we had a little discussion, Yisrael and I. We came out with just, some sort of wondrous number, which and we think it's a conservative number. We're trying to put into perspective, and I think that I will touch upon this issue of, Reb Chaim's godless in Torah was really his core, and when we say his godless in Torah, something which really we can't comprehend the degree of knowledge and the degree of hasmada and the degree of kedusha v'tara that he produced over 94 years. But the other element, which is what really everyone and he became famous for, was the brachas that he gave. The brachas and the Ma'aseh Nisim. Just one little story about I heard that one of our Talmidim from the first Talmidim of Ner Yaakov didn't have children for a few years and came to Reb Chaim for a bracha. And Reb Chaim told him, if you put on a beard, that was one of the things that Reb Chaim used to say would bring bracha. Put on a beard, you're going to have children. You'll have a few children. The Kach have a mice, he put on a beard, and his wife was zocheh to give birth to a baby in a year, and then subsequently she had a few children. And he had a tremendous amount of hakaras hatov to Reb Chaim. So when the Petira happened, he felt very strongly he has to show the kavod and the respect and the honor and hakaras hatov. He wanted to fly on Motzei Shabbos from America, and the flights were all packed. And he's not a well-to-do person; he's a working person. The only ticket he could get was a ticket which would cost $3,000, and he put out the $3,000, and he got on the plane and landed. And I understand, he landed in the middle of Levaya. He maybe got to the end of the Levaya. He stayed over, and he went to the caver, and then he went to be Menachem Avos the following day. That's just like one person. But if we take into account literally, we would just say, thousands and thousands. But we made a shtickle cheshbon, conservative cheshbon. And we kind of said, let's say Reb Chaim Zecher Tzadik V'Vracha was involved with giving out his brachas for only the last 15 years. The truth is, he was doing it before that as well, but let's say only the last 15 years. And the average, because they say that there used to be between 400 to 500 people a day that would come to his house. For sure, in the last 10 years, for sure it was like that. So let's say an average of 300 people were coming over the last 15 years, and we'll only give it a 5-day week. Minus a few weeks of Bein HaZmanim, Yom Tovim, we worked out that the number is a staggering 1 million people that went into Reb Chaim over the years. And maybe some were repeats. Maybe a lot of them were repeats. Let's say it's only 500,000 of people that went into Reb Chaim for brachas. I've always said that number is staggering. Staggering beyond belief. And there's a real question about why Reb Chaim was zocheh to this koyach bracha. And for sure, it has to do with his level of kedusha and Torah and his level of Torah. But I spoke to a lot of Talmidei Chachamim really, there were great Rabbanim before that, great Rashudas, great Tzaddikim. I happen to know many, many great Tzaddikim. They also had a Koyach of Bracha and the Yeshuas and everything else. But the staggering amount of Yeshuas and Refuas that Reb Chaim was involved in, my own personal involvement, of over the years of people, from the members of the family that I went to, and we discussed medical issues and other people's medical issues. And I was there a few times for medical issues and brachas, but Reb Chaim gave brachas to the world. So that koyach, maybe we'll try to uncover that mystery a little bit during the course of this podcast. That's one aspect I wanted to speak about. The second aspect I want to speak about is just to give, most of the stories I'm going to give are going to be personal stories that happened to me over the course of the last, I would say over 40 years that I had the schus to know Reb Chaim on some level. And, when I first met Reb Chaim, he was a lot younger, Reb Chaim, than everyone saw him later in the years. I remember him, he was very, very vibrant and very, very stark and very lebedik. And, he walked with vigor, with a big kayach, and the whole mahus was a gavaldik kayach. Later on, we became elderly, and he had illnesses and everything else. Really, he himself was a ma'aseh nes that he lived for 94 years. He had many, many illnesses, but he lived on a higher level, on a different type of level. And the kayach of Torah is really what we know is really what kept him alive for so many and so many years. But so knowing Reb Chaim from a different perspective, and I'd like to relate to this, the human perspective. So I'm going to start out with a story which relates to the human perspective, and then we're going to try to also capture a little bit of the house of which Reb Chaim grew up in, the house of the Steipler and the house of the Chazon Ish, which I think is an important part of the mystery of Reb Chaim. So we're going to say over a story, we're going to call this Reb Chaim and I went to the beach together. Yes, Reb Chaim went to the beach. Whoa, how could that be? Reb Chaim, the Masman, and everything else. Well, this is the story close to 40 years ago. Can't remember exactly what the dates were. I, like many other, young yeshiva bachrim or younger light, Talmid Chachamim, Bein Hazmanim in Eretz Yisrael. We have the 3 weeks off between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Chodesh Elul, and one of the places that people go to is the separate beach in Netanya. So I was on the beach in Netanya together with a lot of Talmid Chachamim and Rabbanim. Some of them today are world famous Rosh Yeshivas. And I'm enjoying the sun, enjoying the beach. I happened to be, I even spoke to a certain Talmid Chacham and learning over there. Rabbi Levi, he's today one of the Yeshivas of Rabbi Yisachar Meir's Yeshiva, and he was a big Talmid Chacham then. And as I was sitting on the beach, I looked up on top of the hill from which everyone will walk down to Kiryat Sanz, and I see two Bachrim walking together with a person, and I see a very strange scene. I see a man who's wearing a box on his head. He had a carton, almost like it looked like a refrigerator carton, but it was like cut in half and it was over his head. He had a carton on his head. This was Reb Chaim. I had seen him before, but I never saw him with a carton on his head. It was a strange scene, but immediately I chapped. Reb Chaim was being shomer zeinayim. He was afraid that maybe he might see something which he shouldn't see. And again, this is something which is beyond the level of most of us. But he walked down the beach, and when he got to the oilam, he took off the box, put it down, and then he went into the sea. He went into the yam. I was in the yam together with Reb Chaim, and I didn't see Reb Chaim swimming per se, but I did see him jumping against the waves, and it was a phenomenal scene to see. The great Talmid Chacham Reb Chaim was also doing what he was supposed to do, because this is what the Torah tells you, to take care of the body and to get fresh exercise and air. But he did it in a very, very Chazon Ish way. He did it for maybe 15 minutes, That was his participation. I only saw him one day. I don't know if he came other days or not. Can't tell you. And then he went out of the ocean, went back, got his box. Okay. I do remember he had very long tzitzis, which he always wore. I don't remember if he had the tzitzis in the yam or not. My perception is that he took off the tzitzis before he went in, but he was wearing almost positive that he was wearing an undershirt when he went into the yam. And then he went back up with the two, either family members or talmidim of his, and he walked back up. And it made such an impression upon me, because on one hand, you saw the tremendous kedusha that Reb Chaim had, and how he was makbid and shmir seinayim beyond the regular. And people ask questions, well, if he was doing it, what about the people that were escorting him? So it could be Reb Chaim told them that they should keep their eyes down. But Reb Chaim himself had an anhaga which was beyond that. That was his anhaga. And I heard from, and to me it made the impression that, number one, that he's being Shomer Naim, and on the other hand, he's also going into the Yam. That was part of Reb Chaim's gewaldige duality, as I would say. He was able to understand exactly what the Torah wants from you and what he's supposed to do in every single time. I do know that the Chazon Ish himself also used to tell a lot of people, and the Chazon Ish himself used to be a swimmer. I don't know if the Chazon Ish later on in life went to the Mediterranean like Reb Chaim went, but I do know that when the Chazon Ish was younger, he used to go swimming in the river where he lived very early in the morning, and he held it was very, very healthy for a person to go swimming. Like the halacha says, a person's supposed to learn how to swim. He's supposed to teach his son how to swim. It's one of the halachas. The Gemara says in Kedushin. But to me, this I think depicts a lot of, on one hand, almost like a humorous story, box on the head, and the other hand, a very, very real story of how Gedolim, how they live. I'll just go off on a little tangent on that area. I do know that I heard that when Menachem Begin died, again, how's Menachem Begin going to do anything with Reb Chaim? Nothing to do with Reb Chaim. I heard when Menachem Begin died, I heard of David Soloveitchik, the Shiva from Brisk, said, Menachem Begin was a Yelid from Brisk. His father was a Rosh Kola from the Mizrahi. And he grew up, he's a Shomer Shabbos Yiddish, he grew up, and David Soloveitchik, I heard that he said, a shvach on Menachem Begin, that he would come to the place in Brisk. There was a place where all the from Yeshiva Bachrim would go, which was separate, while everybody else went to a mixed crowd. But there was a place where the Yeshiva Bachrim went, maybe they went early in the morning, I don't know exactly what time. And he said Menachem Begin was always makbid to go together with the Yeshiva Bachrim. So it just shows us that the tzaddikim, the gedolim, they're swimmers. I heard of Yaakov Kamenetsky used to be a big swimmer. And we could go on to speak about swimming, but I think we want to stick to the stories about Reb Chaim, and this is a great, great element. Reb Chaim, as everyone knows, he also had great humor. And I have a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, and I want to speak about this story, but my friend Reb Elimelech Lehman, who I spoke to this week, a wonderful, wonderful balabas who lives here in Eretz Yisrael for many years, and he's a supporter of Torah, and he has a lot of schusim, and he has wonderful, wonderful children. And he became close to Reb Chaim, and he told me he was zoiche to give money for some of Reb Chaim's svarim, and he has a lot of brachas that were written from Reb Chaim to him. He was once zoiche, when Reb Chaim in the older days, he used to daven in Letterman with everybody else. And then he started davening in his house because it just made it was worthwhile to daven in the house. He didn't own a Megillah. And supposedly some of the Gaboyim said to Reb Melech, maybe you want to help to buy a Megillah for Reb Chaim. And my friend Reb Melech said, Avada, I want this chusser. He asked him, I told him how much it was. And he went, he ordered a Megillah, he brought the Megillah to Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim was very happy. And Reb Chaim in return wrote him a letter with a bracha. Not a buha, but a letter that he wrote the bracha in. He wrote him a personal letter. And he wrote a line, exactly what he said, bracha v'atzlacha v'chol tuv. I don't know what he read. Till covered Reb Elimelech. Melech says he has the letter. I haven't had a chance to see it. Maybe I'll get a chance to see it. And and Melech has a good sense of humor. So he said to him, Reb Chaim, I don't understand. I give you a ganze Megillah, and all you give me is one line? All you give me one line? So Reb Chaim said back, he says, Reb Melech, Ashura Shaliza Shafei Yoter Megillah, but Megillah, call them Megillas. One line for me is worth more than all the Megillas. That's what Reb Chaim said to him. Reb Chaim had a tremendous, this next story is like an unbelievable story. And it's going to lead us into a little bit of a certain level of the way I saw the Reb Chaim. So at one point, the Stiplers Zatzal had enacted in Letterman that there was a mitzvah to write all of the Chaf Dalet Svarim. That means not only the Nevi'im that we read for the Haftarahs and to have a Sefer Torah, but also to write all of the Chaf Dalet Svarim, that they should be in the shul. And Reb Chaim, it seems, also brought that minig, and it's based upon in the Rishonim or the Gainim. I don't know exactly where it is, that you'll have to find out. But I do know that it's based upon a Makairis. Everything Reb Chaim did was with Makairis. And they decided the last Sefer that was going to be written was the Sefer Tillim. And my friend Melech went to Reb Chaim, and Reb Chaim said, "No, which one do you want?" So Melech said, "Which one do you think is the Chasher one?" He says, "The Tillim is the best one." Now the Tillim is the largest. Of all the Sefer Nevi'im, Tillim is really the largest that's written. So he said. So Melech said, "So why is the Tillim best?" He says, "Because the Nevi'im, the Klaf, we only read them once or twice a year, and some of them we're not going to read at all. But the Tehillim, Eilein, we read it every day." Reb Chaim had a minute in the morning before Vasikin, that they would spend either a half hour saying Pirkei Tillim. They said for the tzaras of Klal Yisrael. Reb Chaim himself would stand by the bima, and they would take out the Sefer Tillim, and they would read it from a klaf, a special Indian of reading it from the klaf, and the tzibur would say Tillim for the tzaras of Klal Yisrael. So it's a big schus. So he gave the money for the Tillim, and then Reb Chaim said there's going to be a Hachnosa Sefer Tillim together with all the Sefer Nevi'im. And my friend Melech said to me, "Reb Yeshua, you'll come, we'll have a great time. There's going to be a suda there." And Reb Chaim was involved with every single aspect. He got the talucha, he got the people with the music. I didn't have it like they have today with things, but they made a Hachnosas Sefer Tehillim together with the Hachnosas of all the Sefer Nevi'im. I was able to go to Letterman. And again, this is before Reb Chaim had a whole entourage. He was already from the Gedolim in learning. But he was very independent. And what happened was, this is the scene that I remember. Besides the fact that there was a Suda at the Gabbai's house, and all the Gedolim, Reb Aaron Leib Steinerman came, and Reb Yanko Galinsky came, and he spoke. And Reb Yanko Galinsky, when he spoke, he knew how to make jokes to make Reb Chaim laugh, mamish. Reb Chaim was laughing, mamish. I'll make this right, belly laughs. Mamish, he just had great jokes based upon the Torah. But he knew how to get people to laugh. And Reb Yanko Galinsky was a big maggid, and he was close to the Stipler, because they both learned in the Vardik together. So then what happened was, they went down from the Gabbai's house if they finished the Ksivas Oisius, like you do for Sefer Torah. And then they took out all the Sifrei Nevi'im. I never saw anything like it. I'm used to a Sefer, Hachnas Sefer Torah, you take out the Sifrei Torah, and everyone dances together. Old Svarim, the new Sefer. He took out all the Sifrei Nevi'im. Dozens of Sifrei Nevi'im. And then they gave Reb Chaim the Tillim to hold. And I have to tell you, when Reb Chaim took hold of the Tillim, he started dancing. And he danced, this is going back close to 30 years ago. He was then in his 60s. And he danced better than any bacher I've ever seen in yeshiva. He was so quick on his feet. Not quick on his feet. It mamish was like unbelievable. And with such a simcha. His face was shining. His face was like a labas eish, mamish like a fire. I never saw anything like it. A simcha yisera. And he didn't dance for 2 minutes. He was dancing for 10, 15 minutes with all of his kaiches. It was beprinas kol atzmoisai tamarna michamoicha Hashem. All of his entire body. And I thought to myself, what's Reb Chaim dancing? It's such a simcha. Because this mitzvah, he had the schus to be Mekayim. That takana that was brought down from the Rishonim and from the Gainim, Mekayim, a mitzvah. That was his greatest joy. And I was thinking to myself that it struck me that there was a mice I remember, and I said this over to a few people, a mice that I saw about the Stipler, his father. And I think this, I want to bring in this point. When we speak about Reb Chaim, we have to know that Reb Chaim did not come from a vacuum. Reb Chaim was the only son of the Stipler, Zeichet Tzaddik Kodesh L'Vracha. His mother was the sister of the Chazon Ish. I don't know much about his mother. But his uncle was the Chazon Ish, and he grew up in the house of his father and in the house of the Chazon Ish. And the Chazon Ish played a big role in all of Reb Chaim's chinuch in the formative years. And what was that house? That house, or those houses, were houses where the Torah and Yir Shamayim was literally, it just was gezapt. It's the only way to say it. Gezapt. It literally was, it's called dripping. It was mamish, that was it. Hasmada. Tremendous Yegiyas HaTorah. Tremendous Yir Shamayim. Beyond what we understand Yir Shamayim, real Yir Shamayim, real palatable Yir Shamayim. And I saw that when I was at the Stipler Zavaya, when the Stipler passed away, I could go to the Stipler many times myself. And I even mentioned that one of the first times I met Reb Chaim was I came to the Stipler and I was asked to buy, I have almost all the Sfarim I was able to get from the Stipler, which wasn't an easy thing. And he tried to convince me, only take one. Which Masechta you're learning? What do you have to have more? I said, no, because I might have to go back to America, and then I want to be able to get back here. And at the end, he sold me Kemat the whole set, but he said that he doesn't have a few volumes. I have to go to Reb Chaim's house. And that was the first time I'd heard about Reb Chaim. But I went to Reb Chaim's house. I was able to get some of the other Svarim. But the main thing I wanted to bring out is that when the Stipler was nifter, there was a hesped. The paper then was not the Yated Neman. There was in one Jewish newspaper, one from newspaper, it's called the Amodia. It still exists today. But in those days, it was run by the Gedolim. There was the Ger Rebbe, and together with Rav Shach and the Stipler. In the end of the day, Rav Shach, it's a whole political issue. Rav Shach ended up leaving because of the way the paper was being run. But at that point, Mahdia was the one paper for the Frum community here in Eretz Yisrael. And during the Shiva, there was an article written, and it said, Rosh Hashiva from America wrote this article. This is what he writes. This Maisa gives us a little bit of an insight to the home and to the place where Reb Chaim grew up in. This Rosh Hashiva said that he came in the times when the Chazon Ish was still alive. He came to Eretz Yisrael a few times to speak to the Stipler and learning. He used to go to speak to Stipler. The Stipler was a tremendous source of Torah for the world. And he came, and he had his kashas that he had from Shas and Bavli and the Rambams, Ricky Vegas, he would go and speak to the Stipler about. And he asked him a series of questions one time when he came here. And the Stipler said, this means like this means like this, that kasha, Medaf Fregen, the Shvaga. The Chazon Ish is the only one that can answer such a shayla. Starka kasha. You have to go to the Chazon Ish. He says, when can we go to the Chazon Ish? He says, we can go now. It was then around 1 o'clock in the morning. He said, we go now? Yeah. The Chazon Ish is up sitting and learning. You don't have to worry about it. So they left the Stipler's house. Again, this is early 50s. And then Bnei Brak was a very, very primitive, poor community. Very little electricity. It was in the fields. They say that there were like wolves outside and everything else. And the Stipler lived a little bit more like there were a few apartment buildings. The same block where the Reb Chaim's house is, where the Stipler lived. And the Chazon Ish lived in Rehov. Then it turned into Rehov Chazon Ish later on. But it was in the fields. It was like in the orchards. It was very dark. But as they got closer to Chazon Ish's house, this way he describes it, the house of the Chazon Ish was like lit up. It looked like it was like he said it was like the electric company. The lights were blazing. It was like so strange. Why is it so lit up? And they didn't even have fluorescent bulbs, and they had like little bulbs. Why is it so lit up? But okay, he figured, I don't know, they have a lot of light there. Maybe it's in the fields, that's why he has lights there. And they get closer, and then they get to the house, and the Stipler knocks on the door, very, very small house, and no one answers, and the Stipler pushes the door open, and they enter into the house. And this is the scene, the way he describes it. The Chazon Ish is sitting by the table, and he's learning. But around him is a fire. the fire is surrounding him. And he saw clearly this fire is not a fire from this world. This fire is the fire which is described in Chazal as Kinisinasan Vesina. An Eish comes down from the Shemayim and it surrounds great Talmidei Chachamim. And immediately it was the Shechina. And we heard these stories about the past, about great, the Chafetz Chaim's Rebbe, that they say the Chafetz Chaim was able to see it. And this Rosh Hashiva from America, he said, he started fainting. And the Stipler was strong, and the Stipler said, it seems the Stipler must have seen this before. The Stipler was on a level of Kedusha to be able to handle it. And he says, Kum medafta roisken. Now's not the time to speak to the Chazon Ish. And he took him outside. And this was a snapshot of who the Chazon Ish was, who the Stipler was. We get a little bit of understanding what level of Kedusha we're talking about. That's where Reb Chaim came from. Reb Chaim continued it. They say Maisa is very, very simple Maisa, that they say that, a lot of people speak about the Indian of Gilu Eliyahu, and they say over that that they once spoke to the Mekuravim of Reb Chaim. They say that they were speaking about, who has Gilu Eliyahu today. So he said, Stam Bar and Leib has Gilu Eliyahu. They said, no, but they said they showed that Reb Chaim had Gilu Eliyahu by a bris. He had Gilu Eliyahu. So Reb Chaim said, by a bris? By a bris? If you can't see Eliyahu, it's like garnished. It's like garnished. At a bris, how do you see Eliyahu Navi? Who sees Eliyahu Navi? Who sees Eliyahu by bris? Reb Chaim. That was the Shafa Medaberet. That was the language that they used. This is the house that this tzaddik came from. When we speak about, so what I want to say is that when I saw Reb Chaim, when I saw Reb Chaim dancing, that fire, that ecstasy, that dancing, I never saw anything like it. In my life, I've never seen anything like it. I've never seen a person so connected to a Sefer Tilim, a klaf, but a Sefer Tilim. But now I have a little bit of understanding of where it came from, because the connection to the Torah, the connection to Kedusha, and now we can have a little bit of understanding when we speak about Reb Chaim putting a box on his head. What's he putting a box on his head? It sounds so strange, so outlandish. No, it's not outlandish. The person's being shomer, zaynayim, this is what it is. I know these are big madregas, but we have to learn from these madregas, no question about it. I once went to Reb Chaim many years ago, and I spoke to him. I think I even asked him a few shilas in learning, and then I went home. I came back home to my house, and I then lived in Telstone, and a few days later, I received a postcard from Reb Chaim. Reb Chaim used to send postcards, little like penny postcards, and he wrote on the top, he wrote one line. It seems I had left some svarim in the house. He says, No lavo lakachat et asfarim sholcha sheisharta babayit ki ein li kesef l'shloch et ze b'dor. Please come pick up your svarim. I'd like to return them, but I don't have the money to send it back. Now, I knew that in my svarim, I didn't write my address. So it means Reb Chaim somehow got someone to investigate this. My phone number was in there, and he found out where I lived, and he took the time to write me a letter. And the next day, after I got the postcard, I went back to Reb Chaim, and he was so happy when I came in, and I told him who I was. He said, oh, mitzvah shavas aveda. I was able to kind of mitzvah shavas. He gave me a big smile. That's the language of Reb Chaim. The language of Reb Chaim, mitzvah shavas aveda. Send a postcard. My late father, I was able to take him to Reb Chaim, and it was a great scene. My father was a baki b'shas, and he had shilas to ask Reb Chaim. And then Reb Chaim, there was no entourage. You walked into the house, and he was sitting and learning, and you got to see him. And I remember it was a boiling hot day in Bnei Brak, a good schwitzy day in Bnei Brak. My father was used to coming from America. Everyone has air conditioning. Those days, Reb Chaim didn't have air conditioning. And I had taken my father to Reb Shach Zatzal beforehand, and we had gone to see Reb David Pavarsky, one of the Shivas Aponovich. Now we came to Tzchus to go to Reb Chaim. And my father started asking him kashas. Reb Chaim was very happy to see him. He started answering him the questions. And my father was schwitzing. Reb Chaim had on his table, he had like a little fan, like an oscillating fan. And he turned the fan and he turned it towards my father. Tried to cool him off a little bit. He saw he was schwitzing. But the fan kept on moving. And Reb Chaim didn't know how you stopped the fan from oscillating. So every second he just was holding the fan. My father would be like this, the fan would move, Reb Chaim would move it back in order to be kind the mitzvah achnosas properly. Little stories, Rabbi said. Little stories, but big stories. They show us really what kind of great person this was. What kind of great loss we have. Without going into the latest news that has been here in Eretz Yisrael, the very, very difficult news that everyone says clearly, we see clearly that Reb Chaim is not with us. We have to take up the slack. But Reb Chaim was our gadol. He was our great, great leader, and we have to learn from him as best as we can. And we're all trying our best. Many, many people are being mekabel themselves. I myself, trying to do my bit. One of the things I'm doing is I'm learning the Sefer Orchis Yosher, which Reb Chaim wrote as Musa Sefer, and I started learning it. And I saw something that it says over here in the first midah, which he speaks about, which was the midah of Emes. And then I saw that his son-in-law, Reb Kolodetsky, I was mechaven to him. And this is a partial answer on the question we asked before. Where did Reb Chaim get the koyach of giving brachas to so many people? And according to our calculations, it might have been somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million people. We don't know exactly. Where did he get this koyach? We don't have the full answer. But Rav Kolodetsky, and I myself saw it in the Orchis Yosher, says a partial teretz. The midas ha'emes, Reb Chaim writes, is such an attribute. It's the chaysim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the signet ring of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he brings down from the Sefer Chasidim, anyone that speaks emes, kol hadover emes, anyone that speaks emes, ve'einu roitz alachshav sheker, doesn't want to think about sheker, v'lo adaber sheker, for sure not to say sheker. Afil dvarim sheyachshav v'sheyedaber af pish lo yiskaven lehem. And sometimes it's even things you don't even think about what you're saying. You just say it. You know what I mean? But no. You say everything only which is going to be the. I'm very, very careful about my words. Everything, and not only my words, my thoughts. He says, if you are going to think truth, then your thoughts are going to become true. And it brings down Shanizer Melishakir, a person that's careful about not lying. Yiskayim will call brachosov. All of his brachos are going to be fulfilled. Why? Because just like he was careful not to say a falsehood, so in the Shamayim, they watch over all of his words, and they say these words are emes, they're going to be fulfilled. What did Reb Chaim do his entire life? He was Isaac in Teiras emes. He was Isaac in mitzvahs. He was Isaac in Maisim Tov. His heart for the Jewish people was beyond. Every single word was a word of emes. And therefore his brachas were in the sky. Why Reb Chaim's brachas more than any other gadol? That's one of the mysteries that we can't resolve completely. But we do know is that we had the schus to have this gadol in our midst. And for this final episode on the greatness of the Gadol Ador, who was taken away so suddenly from us, what we want to ask is that he should be a good to better, he should be a good to interceder, just like he was in this world. Mirz Hashem, we should be Zoicha, to Tchias HaMeisim, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkein, the Beheru Yameinu Amen, wishing everyone a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you very much for listening. We want to thank JFoundations.com. If you could sponsor any of our activities, it'd be another way of addressing and being able to give over Torah to other people. Go on the website and show your support. Thank you very much for joining us.